You're listening to The David Knight Show.
All right, we do have Alex Newman on the line right now. Again, he writes regularly for The New American. You can find him at thenewamerican.com. He also has a Twitter account, Alex Newman _JOU, as a journalist. Thank you for joining us, Alex.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, David. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's great to have you back. It's been a while because you've been traveling a lot. We were going to get you in earlier this week, and you were so busy traveling. It's difficult to establish contact with you in the early morning. But tell us a little bit about what you saw at the climate conference that they had to reschedule from Santiago, Chile, because of the austerity programs and the fact that they're raising public transportation prices on people. They had to reschedule it because of all that unrest to Madrid. It was very difficult for our new female messiah to make that conference, but she got there. So I'm sure that you got a glimpse of Greta, or as I pointed out, we really ought to start calling her Greta, because it's $750 billion just for Goldman Sachs alone if they can get this kind of stuff through. So it really is about the greed, isn't it?
It absolutely is, David. And, being there, you really understand why the American media has remained almost totally silent about this. You get the feeling of being in a gigantic, insane asylum run by criminal madmen who are only interested in stealing your money and enslaving you. It's absolutely surreal, David. And, St. Greta's strutting around, and you have thousands of so-called journalists and world leaders bowing down at her feet. And then anytime anybody criticizes their ideology and their fake hypothesis that man's emissions of CO2 are going to kill the planet, suddenly you're making fun of a child with a mental disorder. How dare you? You're so evil. Yeah. So, from a PR perspective, it was a brilliant move. But it was really unbelievable, David. You had all these Americans trotted out on the stage to talk about how horrible America was and how evil Donald Trump was and how we're all climate criminals. It was incredible. And, the reality is they're very, very confident about their success. They think now it's just a waiting game, wait for President Trump to be gone, and we will go full speed ahead right over the cliff.
Yeah. And, it's come out now in the last couple of days as they've announced this Hulu documentary that they've had a film crew following her around from, the very inception of her campaign. So this whole thing was orchestrated by these people for a very long time.
It clearly was. And, I was actually living in Sweden when St. Greta was discovered by the powers that be. Sweden is an interesting place. They have an indoctrination system that I think would have made the Soviets or maybe the North Koreans blush. It is absolutely total, comprehensive, incredibly effective. And
do they call it the Stockholm Syndrome?
Right. It'd be a very appropriate name. But, they're very effective at brainwashing these poor children. They get them all stuffed in the classroom, and then they terrorize them. Oh, evil climate criminal, you're all going to die because of your horrible parents. And, if I had stood up on stage and talked to adults the way that Greta was talking to, the parents' generation and the world leaders, you guys are all terrible, you messed up my future, I would have been slapped in the face, and rightfully so. But Swedish children and American children, too. Al Gore was very clear. Hey, all your youth are marching out in our climate marches. It's just a matter of time before our ultimate victory. They're brainwashing these poor kids, weaponizing them, and then using them as a battering ram to break down civilization. Last time I was on your program, David, we talked about the so-called educational system.
That's right.
This is their secret weapon, and they made it very, very clear throughout the COP25. They know older Americans are skeptical. They know Trump has called it a Chinese hoax. It drives them absolutely mad. But they also know they've got most of our kids, and that's their trump card.
That's right. They can change the culture. They can change the politics. And they can do it through the educational system, and that's why it was so important when you are. Do you still have the website? I know that was a big project for the New American. They created a separate magazine. We talked about that, as you pointed out, last time you were on. Is that still available at New American?
That is. Yeah, it's thenewamerican.com/rescuingourchildren. You can get printed or PDF copies of the special report. And actually, we do spend quite a bit of time in there talking about the centrality of this man-made global warming hypothesis and the brainwashing of the children to accept it in the broader goal for a new world order. They are trying to, they can't convince adult Americans for the most part, but younger Americans, they're trying to convince them that the gas they exhale is actually a toxic pollution and that we're all doomed unless we let the UN tax and regulate it. This is going to be fundamental to the global system that they're building. And as they see it, it's just a waiting game right now.
It's not just the political stuff, but we talk all the time, and we did last time you were on, about the destruction, the spiritual destruction of our children. the pushing of the transgender agenda and so forth. Teen Vogue, again, it's not the school, but it is entertainment. They now have a top transgender Christmas gifts, chest binders, scar cream, and everything for teenagers after they've had mutilating surgery and so forth. I mean, this kind of insanity is being pushed against, as I pointed out yesterday, against autistic kids. If you don't understand what a danger the education system is to your children, that's what Alex Newman said last time. He had a great example, Alex. You said you got a burning building. First thing you do is go in there and you get your kid out of there, and then you try to put that fire out because it's going to burn down your community. And that's the political aspect of it. But first, save your kids. I mean, if Americans don't care about saving their kids from this kind of self-destructive behavior, and it's not just mutilating themselves, but it's also telling them, you are a poison, you are a disease on the planet. That's the way they've been selling this. Gaia is some kind of a, earth goddess, and we are the virus that's destroying it. You're talking about the air that we breathe out. We've got The Guardian talking about how we're going to have peak meat by 2030. Again, always 2030. That's when we're going to limit your meat. We'll talk more about that, and when we come back, I want to talk to you, Alex, about the idea that they, like you said, they're waiting for Trump to get out. They think they've got us in. Nancy Pelosi said we're still in. Well, no, we're not. We're not in the Paris Climate Accord, and I don't even understand why the Trump administration is saying it's going to take another year. But we'll be right back with Alex Newman. Welcome back. We're talking to Alex Newman. He went to the COP25, the climate conference that was rescheduled from Chile to Spain. And I want to ask you, Alex, when you were there, we have all this talk. We had Nancy Pelosi go there and say, we're still in, we're still in. And when I reported that, I said, we're not in. We never were in. You can't self-ratify a treaty as John Kerry and Barack Obama said they were going to do. And immediately, President Trump, well, not immediately, it took him 6 months because you had Rex Tillerson, a big oil climate change supporter, and Ivanka telling President Trump, don't do anything about it. And he had other people in the administration telling him, you don't really need to do anything about it. They didn't formally get this done. But you had other people telling him, no, you must formally oppose this because the Democrats are going to pretend that we're in it. And she still is pretending that we're in it, even though President Trump said we're not. And so my question to you is, what is going on with this? Because, this is like saying that and they've done this over and over again. They did it with DACA and so forth, that say that President Trump cannot, with an executive order, overturn the previous president's executive order. What's going on? Why is it going to take the Trump administration another year to formally, quote unquote, formally get out of a treaty that we were never formally in?
Fantastic question, David. And this is a really confusing area. I think the globalists have deliberately tried to muddy the waters here. They are pretending like the Paris Agreement is a legitimate treaty that's been properly ratified. Of course, we know that it hasn't been. Obama called it an executive agreement. I actually went and searched my Constitution. You can take my word for it. There's nothing in there about an executive agreement. And they said that, under the terms of the Paris Agreement, you can't get out until the day after the next presidential election. Of course, they did that on purpose. And for whatever reason, the Trump administration has accepted this. And the U.S. State Department, I actually talked with the U.S. State Department delegation that was over in Madrid for this COP25 summit, and they're treating that as legitimate. They are saying that the day after the next election will be our final day in the Paris Agreement, but they're also saying that after the election, the next president can just come along and it'll only take 1 month to reverse that decision and get us back in. So you did have this huge delegation of Democrats come over there, Nancy Pelosi and almost a dozen Democrats from Congress, including Senator Whitehouse, who wanted to prosecute climate deniers, literally under the RICO statutes, right? Anti-mafia legislation. That's how unhinged these people are. And they are absolutely confident that they're going to succeed, even if Trump wins another election, because I think we'll just have to wait a little longer, give it another 4 years after that. So that's the reality. And who came to Madrid actually was Trump's climate advisor. He actually resigned finally after a couple of years on the National Security Council, Dr. William Happer of Princeton University. And I've known him for some years. We've spoken multiple times on these issues. And he had some really insightful comments, David, that he delivered at a climate reality conference that took place in Madrid, organized by some skeptical organizations. He said, first of all, you touched on this before the break. What's going on over at the COP25, he said this is a destructive, a bizarre environmental cult is the term he used. And it really is. I mean, these people now have adopted all the trappings of religion, and they've counterfeited true religion. Hey, you're a sinner. You have a carbon footprint. You ate a cheeseburger. Now you must pay the UN and Al Gore to, get out of purgatory, so to speak. Right?
You got to pay an indulgence. You got to. That's what a carbon tax is. It's an indulgence, and you've even got the Pope now saying we got ecological sins. I mean, they really truly are embracing every aspect of this as a religion.
That's right. And you have Saint Greta, Her Holiness, lecturing us all on what evil sinners we are and how we all deserve hell. And if we don't, this has become a religion. And what
Joan of Arc
said, they're calling her that. I mean, there's people now in Sweden saying she's a saint, the successor to Jesus Christ. So this is the kind of mentality that these people are coming from. It's a dangerous false religion. But Dr. Happer had some very insightful comments. He said it's clear Trump recognizes this is absolutely phony. Trump understands this. But what Dr. Happer said is unless Trump comes out and changes the narrative, these people are going to win. He said, we can talk about it's too expensive. We're not going to join it because it doesn't make sense from a financial perspective. But if that's the approach we take, we're going to lose over the long term. And so Dr. Happer was working with Trump to try to change the narrative. He says the bureaucracies are absolutely packed with people who don't want to put their necks out and really take the initiative to point out that, no, this pseudoscience is a false religion. It needs to be stopped. It's incredibly destructive. And Mark Morano said this, too. We interviewed him at the COP25. He said, unless we change the narrative, this battle is over.
That's right. That's right. And this whole thing about even the treaty, it's one of these things that makes me just want to bang my head into the wall. When I look at DACA, for example, okay, you got the executive order that came not even from Obama directly, but from his Homeland Security Secretary saying she's going to defer enforcement of the law. She took an oath to enforce the law. She says, well, I'm not going to enforce it. And that was their order. And then you got the entire judiciary telling President Trump, well, now you can't change that. And he acquiesces to that in the same way that they say, well, Obama self-ratified us into this treaty, and you can't undo that. And you go, oh, okay. He listens to these people around him, or people on the other side of the aisle, or he listens to, the lawyers and the corrupt judiciary absolutely lying. And this is like coming onto a plantation after the 13th Amendment was passed and telling everybody, well, it looks like you're free, but you're really not. I'm telling you, just take my word for it. Oh, okay, well, I'll keep working on the plantation.
It really is troubling, David. I think Trump has the right instincts. He wants to do the right thing, but he is in the midst of a swamp that absolutely intends to destroy not just him, but the American people as well. So I hope in the second term he will become much more bold, start getting rid of some of these terrible advisors, and really come out swinging. At the COP25, David, and none of this was reported in the American media, but these people have gone absolutely stark raving mad. They are saying now that we cannot avoid paying for loss and damage. They're demanding climate reparations. They're saying the U.S. must pay. There's no way to get out of it. You have an international relations professor at the University of Copenhagen saying the UN can declare climate change to be a threat to international peace and security, and then they can use UN peace troops to go enforce these UN climate decrees on nations that resist. That's the kind of unhinged insanity that is coming out of the mouths of the people who are running this clown show called the UN COP25. And again, nothing about it in the American media, but in Europe they're reporting it, in Africa they're reporting it, in Asia they're reporting it. It's only Americans who are being kept in the dark because they know if Americans wake up and put their foot down, this whole freak show comes to a screeching halt.
We've already had a lot of people, even at the Pentagon, saying this is the, greatest threat that we face, not terrorism or, Russia or China. No, it's climate change in our own Pentagon. And then, as you point out, you got these people saying, well, we could use UN troops and so forth. When you mentioned reparations, we had the Daily Guardian. I've got the article right here in front of me. UN warns U.S. cannot escape paying climate reparations. Let's understand what they mean by reparations. They're not even just talking about carbon taxes. This is far worse than that. When they talk about reparations, what they're trying to do is justify outright confiscation. And it's far worse than carbon taxes. I mean, carbon taxes are bad enough. It's a scheme, as I pointed out. That's why, talked about that yesterday with Goldman Sachs and say, really the way you pronounce her name is Greta, because it's really about that unbridled greed that's there. But, the carbon taxes, they have to have a global problem for a global government, and you got to find a way to fund that global government. So, of course, carbon taxes. But the reparations is a way to come in and just confiscate the wealth of nations outright. And that's being pushed by The Guardian and these other people at this climate conference.
Oh, they said it was mandatory, that we must pay it. We can't get out of it. And what they're saying is, hey, there was bad weather in some Latin American country. That's because the U.S. Developed and emitted carbon dioxide, and so now the U.S. taxpayer must pay to the third world kleptocrats to make up for these alleged damages caused by CO2 emissions. It sounds absolutely bonkers to anybody with common sense, but this is the rhetoric that's coming out of the mouths of world leaders on the world stage at these summits. And unless the American people firmly stand up and say it's not going to happen, this is where we're headed. And get this, you mentioned Russian collusion. You know how you can know these people don't actually believe the garbage, and certainly the young, brainwashed zombies do. But at the higher levels, they don't believe this. Communist China is emitting way more CO2 than the United States, and their CO2 emissions are on the way up. And they said they're going to keep going up. They're going to keep building, coal-fired power plants. And I don't hold that against them. Build as many coal-fired power plants as you want. CO2 is good for the planet. But if they
I was just
really
going to ask you that. Did you hear anybody, Alex, at that conference criticize China or India about their emissions?
Not a peep, David. And what you do have is all these environmental groups getting funding from the Kremlin. And this was documented by the U.S. Congress. They found out that the Kremlin was funding a shell corporation in Bermuda called Klein Limited. This Klein Limited was then sending it to the Sea Change Foundation in the United States. And then the Sea Change Foundation was funding the Climate Action Network and all these different green groups. So you have the Russians and Gazprom, which makes up 50% of Russian exports, funding green groups in the United States to keep our energy in the ground. If they really believed CO2 was going to kill the planet, this whole farce would have been exposed.
Can you stay one more segment? Since we got you a little bit late. All right, we're going to keep Alex Newman on one more segment. Yeah, that exposes the true fraud of this. And even the true believers, when they looked at the Paris Climate Accord, they said, wait a minute, we got the two biggest polluters on Earth, China and India. Nothing is being done to them with this Paris Climate Accord. It is a fraud. It's about nothing other than transferring wealth. That's exactly what it is, reparations. Welcome back. We're talking to Alex Newman, thenewamerican.com. And again, it always goes back, Alex, to education. We talk about how they're using and abusing Greta. But they're also, as I pointed out yesterday, there's a lawsuit that's just been filed against a lot of the tech companies over what is happening with electric batteries, lithium-ion batteries. And a key component of that is not just the lithium that I believe is one of the reasons why we are in Afghanistan indefinitely, but also what was behind the Bolivian coup. But you also have the cobalt mines, which is a big part of that in Africa. And so we have children, African children, who are being endangered, impoverished, enslaved in mines to get these natural resources, just like you see Greta being abused and used in a different way. But, of course, it's our own children who are being brainwashed in the schools, brainwashed to accept their own slavery, their own starvation, their own austerity that is going to be imposed upon them because they should sacrifice themselves to this false narrative of climate change. And that's really what we've got to unload, isn't it? This educational propaganda that is a stronghold over our children in order to remake society.
Absolutely, David. And I think if we're going to win this over the long term, that is going to be the only strategy that is successful, is dealing with the education. Because, again, at the COP25, they were really open about the fact that, hey, the young kids are ours, right? They're out marching. And Al Gore said it. The young kids, all your kids are out there marching in the streets for climate justice. It's just a matter of time. We are unstoppable now. Of course, they want to reduce the number of children. Reducing, depopulating the planet was a huge topic at the COP25. But you had every kind of educational quack organization there. We actually ran into one lady. She had a device funded by the European Union, by the way, the taxpayers, a device that would show children how the concentration of CO2 is going up in their classroom as they sit in there. And then they tell them, oh, kids, this is bad for you. It's going to make you tired. It's going to make you groggy. So you got to open up the window now that the concentration of CO2 has gotten higher. This is absolutely, completely ludicrous, David. The idea that CO2 is somehow going to harm these children. And yet this is what they're telling little kids in classrooms all across Europe. They're telling them that having babies is bad for the planet. They're telling them that, doing pretty much anything except submitting to the UN is going to harm Mother Earth. So the kids are the key. It's the strategy that the globalists are using. And if we want to defeat them, we're going to have to address this issue.
I look back at this, and they had the first Earth Day when I was in high school. I'm that old. And They were telling everybody we're going to be out of oil, we're going to have a ice age, we're going to have massive starvation, so we've got to have population reduction and so forth. I've seen these lies. I've seen them cycle. I've seen them rotate. They were the same people who were telling us we had peak oil and we're going to be out of oil. I've shown the magazines many times how Newsweek and Time Magazine were telling everybody we're going to be totally out of oil and natural gas by the mid-1980s. But at that time, they were saying, we got to find another source of energy. We're all going to die. Now they just want us all to die. They're talking about peak meat and peak population and all this stuff. And they don't want even replacement for this stuff. They just want us to die, don't they?
That's exactly right, Dan. We've got so much footage of this. Some of it we've already put out there. We're going to be putting out more. We've got multiple top UN speakers. I mean, these were people on the most prominent stages at this UN conference, 25,000 people at these things, openly telling us, don't have kids. One guy, a director of the movie Woodstock from Hollywood, he points at my face. I said, what's the solution? He said, don't have kids. And I'm looking at you, white man. Then you have others saying, oh, there's too many Africans. We got to shower them with abortions and birth control pills. These people are crazy. One of my colleagues got a video at a recent UN summit, the one they held in Salt Lake City, of a guy laughing, we can't kill them all. That's where
it is a suicide cult, and they're serving your kids the Kool-Aid in the government schools. It's just that simple, folks. And Alex Newman has been at the foundation. That is where this is the wellspring of this insanity. The wellspring of this suicide cult is the government-run schools. Get your kids out. Take a look at Alex Newman at thenewamerican.com. Thank you so much, Alex. We'll be right back, folks. David. Always.
It's Paul Joseph Watson with Summit.News and Action 7 News. We're here in Hong Kong.
This is Savannah Hernandez for Infowars.com. I'm reporting to you from Hong Kong, where I'm joined by reporter Greg Reese for the next week.
This is Greg Reese for Infowars.com in Hong Kong. Our recent trip to Hong Kong was a new achievement for Infowars.com. Despite being the most banned broadcast in the free world, we continue to win because of our great, strong, loyal audience. We have Dan Lyman covering Infowars Europe, Paul Joseph Watson in the UK, Millie Weaver and Caitlin Bennett in the American heartland, and from Austin, Texas, a team of reporters and crew ready to be dispatched wherever the story is going down. We are not done winning, and with your support, we will keep winning.
We have to keep winning. We have to win more.
Go to InfoWarsStore.com.
You have gone to InfoWarsStore.com and gotten books and films and supplements and T-shirts and water filtration, air filtration, and things you need.